නිවා ගන්න බෑනේ හොරු අරන් ගියාවාගේ දරදඬුයි තවම ගීනේ මගේ හීන පිරුණු දැසේ දුක නිවා ගන්න බෑනේ හොරු අරන්
TV1 TV for life. Newsfirst face to face with Shalom Bendit.
Hello there, a very good evening. Welcome to another edition of Face to Face. Joining us this evening on Face to Face is parliamentarian Eran Wickramaratne from the Samagijana Balavagia. A very good evening, Mr. Wickramaratne, and welcome to the show.
Good evening, Shalan. Thank you for inviting me.
So, starting off, we're in the run-up to an election, and usually during the run-up to an election, as we have seen back in 2015, back in 2019, usually there's quite a lot of violence, quite a lot of drama. Well, we seem to be in the drama phase right now, wherein today an interim order was issued barring former President Maithripala Sirisena from holding the office of chairman of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, and also barring certain other senior members of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party from implementing the decisions of former President Maithripala Sirisena. Then we have one of your party supporters, members, new members, activists, Damita Abhiratne being arrested by the CID. So a lot of drama really taking place in the run-up to an election. Is this, the usual drama that precedes an election, or is there something more to what's happening right now?
Yes, before an election, definitely there's a lot of uncertainty, and particularly in the last 2-3 years, this government has gone into splinters and broken into many different factions. The Sri Lanka Freedom Party was just one of those. And so all those groups are also having their own internal problems, even though they broke away from the government. And I think that elections, yes, it creates some tension because of uncertainty. But I think that there's a more fundamental issue. The more fundamental issue is how political parties actually operate. And in Asia, political parties don't have very well established democratic frameworks. All parties, virtually, there are few exceptions.
Okay.
Even in Sri Lanka, and the United National Party at the beginning had some semblance of democracy. Even when President Premadasa was made leader, it was Jaya Jayawardena who came, he held an election, Kamini Dissanayake and Premadasa received the votes, and the most votes were for Premadasa, and he subsequently succeeded. But since Ranil Wickramaratne became party leader, that idea also just disappeared. And it's true with all parties, and I think that if the country is to go forward and to progress, leaders must not be scared of elections, internal elections, because elections are not only about going and changing governments. You should practice the principle internally, which is not practiced, and I think that reforms are needed. Internal elections need to be held. So this is a wider problem. The other quick thing, Sharon, I would like to say here is that once you have been in political office and you become the president of the country, or in the earlier system, prime minister of the country, the highest executive positions, once you have finished that, I think you should be moving away. There are other roles in life that you can play. But what is happening? Even ex-presidents are coming back to parliament to become legislators, right? I think Sri Lanka is ridden with problems because of this. So whether it's Rajapaksa or whether it's Maithripala Sirisena or whoever, I think it's totally unacceptable. We need to build better practices to take this country forward.
So before we progress any further, I would like to apologize to all our viewers out there. We experienced a little bit of technical difficulty at the beginning of the program, but we're good, we're back, and we will continue our discussion with Mr. Eran Wickramaratne. So speaking further, now we see a lot of things being said, about change, and political parties seem always very eager, very prone to change during the run-up to an election, because they want to give the general public that hope, that feeling that much can be achieved and we can do this much at such a pace. But come the election, once a political party takes power, all of that goes out the back door, and they just continue in their slumber of these old and outdated practices. Do you think that we've come to a point in Sri Lanka where this will really change after this election, or is this just another farce?
Yeah, I think, Shalan, it's very difficult for me to completely reject the idea you put forward, because structurally, right, you have those same old sets of people in those political parties at the top, right? And they think in a particular way, they know each other, right, and for too long, right, and they probably, as often we hear the case, may more wanting to protect each other, and therefore they won't let the system run. Now, if you have internal party democracy, Shalan, it helps because new people keep coming forward, you know, and that itself is a process change, and it creates a systemic change. So all this actually contributes to it. So I, of course, live in hope that change will come. I think you need a trigger point, because if you hit the trigger one day, then things will begin to change very, very quickly. But the question is, to push to the trigger is always a challenge.
So it's like getting past that limiting friction.
You have to. For example, let's say now corruption is a big issue, and people say, you know, there are politicians who have robbed, stolen, there are high officials who have robbed, stolen, some have assets in the country, some are hidden outside the country, you know, these need to be got. So one thing that the government did is brought a new law on anti-corruption, and it's a good law, I must say that. And in fact, I had moved a private member's bill on making public the declarations on assets and liabilities. Actually, they incorporated those provisions at the amendment stage as well. And then there is a good law. But Sri Lanka's issue, Shalan, is not the law. It's the implementation issue. So SJB is there. But where is the implementation of SJB? It's months and months since we passed the law. But there is no implementation, right? So then in addition to that, I'm focused on implementation. I'm saying, right, that we need to have an independent public prosecutor. And the reason I'm saying that is break it away from the Attorney General's department, who is a advisor to the government. So it's independent. So they can act independently. So if cases are instituted, it doesn't come under a minister or politician or anybody. It just goes on and on and on. You can't withdraw it unless, of course, the judiciary decides to throw it out for whatever reason. So we have to find mechanisms where you can actually do this. Then another thing, because I'm very focused on implementation, right, things that need to be done. Put the systems in place. Now, often businessmen come and complain to us, often saying, we can't get anything passed, we have to pay bribes, and they are talking about the big institutions in the country. They're talking about inland revenue, they're talking about customs, you know, they're talking about excise and so forth. Now, in every institution, I must say there are very good officials and good officers. And often what happens is, however good you are, because there are corrupt people within it, you get tainted. I have the same issue. Everybody sometimes says every politician is corrupt. You say,
So you fall into the same basket.
So you fall into the same basket. So I really sympathize with the good customs officials, good inland revenue officials and excise officials. But because some of the others, we all get tainted with it. So systems need to be changed. So what do we need to do there? Right? We will, when we are in office, we will create a central revenue collection authority. So if you go to your customs and you clear your goods, you don't have to interact with officials and all that. Electronically the message is sent to the central revenue collection authority that this is a goods, is so they chess codes, whatever, they look at it, they say this is what needs to be paid, you pay it there, message goes there, goods get released. This is nothing new, Shalan. These have been done in other countries. So whether it's inland revenue or whether it's that. So looking at using technology and reducing the interaction with politicians and officials. I'll give you a simple example, day-to-day example. You drive through the red light, right? And suddenly a policeman will stop you after that. This is Sri Lanka. And then he will bring his book and he wants to write something. And then you will have a smart guy sometimes with his license. He will put some cash in it and pass it back. And he will give it back because the guy thinks, I pay this police officer something, I don't have to go around, you know, to court, I don't have to go around paying a large fine, just settle it instantly, it's efficient. That may be the thinking, right? But it's really a corrupt practice. Now, if you take it in, maybe in some other countries, you drive to the red light, right? Nobody stops you. You go home, right? 2-3 days later, you get a letter at home saying you went through the red light
On this and such a date.
such and such date, such and such a place. Please pay this fine. If you don't pay the fine, in 2 weeks, we'll be instituting legal proceedings against you. No technology was used, no interaction with any official, corruption comes down. So what we have done is we have thought through a lot of these things in a kind of way that will really practical way. Then the other issue that we need to tackle is stolen assets, right? There's a stolen assets recovery, right? There's a stolen assets recovery process. The United Nations has a process.
No, there's a piece of legislation that is going to come somewhere around April.
I'm hoping that it will come as well. The stolen assets recovery legislation is necessary, and we will put pressure on the government to bring it, right? And then we get into the question about on that we need to look at international practice and see how we actually going to address that, right? And there we will look at international practices and we will look at international cooperation. And in some of these things you have to work with others. This idea that you can do everything, you can't do everything, because because Sri Lankans are globally connected, and particularly those who steal and rob are connected. They have assets elsewhere, and obviously
They have citizenship also elsewhere.
some of them have citizenship elsewhere as well. But now that you said it, the most hilarious part, Shalan, is this. They have citizenship elsewhere, and they come to this country and they are trying to decide who is going to be the next president of this country, when should there be an election in this country. They are trying to decide. Now I am being very frank here, Shalan, right? And because those people are Sinhalese, like myself, right, most people are silent and they accept it. I am telling you, if a non-Sinhalese were to do that, citizen of another country, originated in Sri Lanka, come here and try to direct affairs in this country, they would have said, either they would have said he's a
They'd have burnt his house down.
Burnt his house, or he's a tiger connection, or he's some other extremist religious party connection, terrorists or something like that. You see, but if Sinhalese is doing it, which is, you raised a very important point, right? Foreign country citizens. I mean, can I go, Shalan, to England and then decide, how the Labour Party or the Conservative Party, should be campaigning?
If you had citizenship there.
I mean, without citizenship, if I am a citizen here, I can't go into another country and do that. So this is why I'm saying that we had to be clear. We are focused on implementation. So as I said, CBOC is there, anti-corruption law is there. We'll bring a independent public prosecutor. We'll create a central revenue collection authority. We'll use technology. Some of the examples I told you, in actually being able to implement the anti-corruption laws.
So it's almost certain that it's the presidential election that's going to come, because President Ranil Wickramaratne has informed even the Elections Commission and all other stakeholders in the election that there is not going to be an election until the IMF agreements are finalized, the creditor agreements, so on and so forth, and that will be somewhere around the end of July. So technically what's being said is no early general election. We're directly going into a presidential election. So people are trying to put one and one and trying to decide, make an informed choice, at least this time around, on who is best to hold this office. Now, there are many contenders, and just like you said, not only the government, I believe, the entire political establishment here in Sri Lanka is in tatters, post Aragalera and post everything that has happened here in Sri Lanka during these past few years. So you might find yourself in a bit of a tricky situation, because now you are opposing the man who led your political party for a significant number of years. I believe you've served in his governments under his leadership longer than you've served under any other leader of the UNP or the current leader of the SJB. So what kind of a feeling is that for you?
No, I'm not focused on individuals. I think this focus on individuals came with the presidential system, and everybody thought that one person has the answers for the country and will solve the country's problems and all that.
But isn't that not necessarily that one person has the answers? I know people do think that, but doesn't the political will kind of stem from there? I mean, we could even take a piece out of what happened in Singapore. The political will, although he was the leader of Singapore for 30 years, the will stemmed from there. It's not that he did everything himself, but isn't that more what is really happening?
Yeah, so I think even the Singapore story is often misunderstood. Lee Kuan Yew was a leader, right? And Lee Kuan Yew did remarkable things, right? But Lee Kuan Yew depended a lot on the team. And if you have seen some of the writings that are there, the Men in White, for example, he had about 10 people, right, who really led Singapore. Right? So often the focus is on the leader, but those people, their knowledge, their experience, their integrity, their personalities, all weighed in making that change, right? So I think there are two aspects here in the election that needs to be looked at. One is, who are the people? Integrity, absolutely need to be looked at. Education and experience needs to be looked at, because in running anything for that matter, even if you're running a company, you need the requisite experience. I just came from the Great Managers Award ceremony a little while ago at Kingsbury. Without great managers, those companies don't prosper. That's that Colombo Leadership Academy is doing an excellent job on that, right? Without that, they won't make it. It's the great managers that do it. Same thing goes in politics. You need the people, no question about it, and you need the policy. Both have to go hand in hand. Now, if I give you an example, you have state-owned enterprises. They make huge losses, some of them. Most of them make huge losses, right? And then when the government is trying to do something like rationalize it, maybe close some down or privatize, get new investment or whatever, immediately you hear this cry, oh, they are selling, Wickramaratne. This is the cry you hear. This is a 75-year-old story that we have heard, selling. Right? It's absolute rubbish, right? Because if a state-owned enterprises are making losses, it's the poor taxpayer, right, who is actually funding those losses. That's what's been actually happening. So we have to get away from this thing, and some people say, if it's profit-making, don't sell it. Absolute nonsense people are talking. What we should really be looking at is really what is the return on asset? Because we are the public, the public's assets these are, the public need a return. My simple example often is this: I own 2 houses, Sharon. I live in one, and my other house I keep it shut down. I own it, but I know no return. I have 2 options. I can sell that house. I can take the money, put it in the bank, and I can get a return, an interest return. Right? I don't own it, but I have a return. It's beneficial, unlike having a closed house. There's another way I can do it. I can keep the ownership and I can rent it out and get a return. So there are different ways to do it, but it's a return that matters. It's not the ownership, it's a return that matters. Shalan, I was just driving down in Wickramaratne the other day, and I saw all these state lands, right, just not being put to productive use. I looked around, Shalan. I couldn't believe the poverty I saw, right? Small houses, huts that people are living in, children, little children. What's their future? Their future. I mean, if you don't have a house, proper house with some security and a light bulb and a table, your education doesn't matter what school you go to, it doesn't matter which tutor you go to.
Doesn't matter how smart you're born.
It doesn't matter how smart you are, right, if you don't have that. And they are living in huts. Now, my question is this: those are assets, the land that is there. Why isn't that land being used to give it to people to get better housing done? This is not a question of selling, Wickramaratne. Assets need to bring a return to the public. That's what it should be. I'm very clear. If there's an SJB government, some state-owned enterprises, we will shut it down. I heard some political parties saying, Sri Lankan Airlines, my heavens, we must keep it as it is. What kind of nonsense are they talking about? Some need to be shut down so that there are no losses. Some state-owned enterprises, give it to the Sri Lankan private sector. Let them make a profit out of it. Then some state-owned enterprises, if they don't have enough investment, get foreign investors to invest in it. Some state-owned enterprises, public-private partnerships. I'm all for helping people to make big profits, but I also want to tell those investors,
they'll have to pay their taxes.
I will get them to pay their taxes because social justice also is important in the country, that we protect the vulnerable and the poor. But we must create the environment for people to create wealth, not for the state to think that the state can run these things. And I don't know why people can't free themselves from this thinking of 50 years. 50 years. The other day I was reading Steve Jobs', one of Steve Jobs' books, right? You know, the creator of the iPhone and the Apple, right? And some things really make you think. He just said something like this in the book. He said, who do you think made the greater contribution to the world? Was it Karl Marx or was it Thomas Alva Edison? I stopped to think. I'm not saying that Karl Marx didn't make a contribution, but I stopped to think the way Steve Jobs was thinking. If not for the electricity and the bulb, where would the world be today?
Mr. Wickramaratne, now your views on you know, selling and getting a return, of course, they're quite grounded in rationale. But the problem in Sri Lanka inherently has been not whether assets are being sold or assets are being leased. Of course, there are those who agitate against it, and there is a bit of contention there. But it's always who it's being sold to, who is it being leased to, and if they are you know, under the rule of law here in Sri Lanka, and of course, like you very rightly said, pay their taxes, pay their dues. Is the process transparent? Does everybody have an opportunity to try and, you know, try their luck at leasing or purchasing these state-owned assets that you spoke of? Unfortunately, Mr. Wickramaratne, I'd love to continue our conversation along those lines, but we have come to the end of this edition of Face to Face. Thank you very much, Mr. Wickramaratne, for those insightful thoughts that you imparted on us today. Thank you very much to all our viewers out there for tuning in to another episode of Face to Face. We will continue to keep you up to date on the latest political unfoldings, because it's your duty to make an informed choice at the upcoming elections, and it's our duty to keep you informed. And we will continue to do just that. Thank you very much for tuning in. Take care, and God bless.